Hello and welcome to EBRD's COVID-19 Resilience Framework, Local Environmental and Social Assessment Skills Capacity Building Programme. This is Video 7, Healthcare Infrastructure and Pharmaceuticals. My name is Stuart Hume from a company called Environmental and Social Advisory Services, or ESAS, and I'm a social specialist. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm joined by my colleague Alan Phillips. Alan, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Stuart. My name's Alan Phillips and I have over 20 years experience of undertaking monitoring and due diligence on many EBRD projects.
Thank you, Alan. And so what we're going to do now is to introduce the purpose of the video, which is to illustrate how EBRD's environmental and social policy and the accompanying performance requirements can be applied during an environmental and social assessment of a project within the healthcare and pharmaceutical sector. And for the purpose of this video, we are going to use the example of the construction and operation of a new hospital in Central Asia. So now let's take a greater look at the project. So some key facts. Part of the site was previously used for the repair of vehicle engines, and the remaining area was not developed. Construction involves multiple companies working at the same time, with the total workforce reaching a peak at 2,000. The client is going to provide accommodation to the workforce. The project itself, the new hospital, is located in a seismic hazard zone, and the operational workforce is going to reach a maximum of 3,000 in the future. Now there are some photographs provided at the base of the slide, and on the left you can see the construction works and the big crane, indicating there's going to be a lot of heavy lifts involved in the construction phase. And on the right is an illustration of the ward, which is what I suspect it will look like in the future. Now let us look at the application of the PRs to this specific project. So PR1, Assessment and Management of Environmental and Social Risks and Impacts. Well, PR1 always applies, and this was classified as a Category B project. The client has completed an environmental and social assessment, even though an environmental impact assessment, an EIA, was not required under national legislation. PR2, Labour and Working Conditions. Well, PR2 applies as well due to the presence of a workforce. There's going to be multiple suppliers providing goods and services both during construction and during operation. And of course, during construction, the client is providing accommodation to the workforce. So with so many companies involved in this quite complex project, contractor management is certainly going to be a key issue. PR3, Resource Efficiency and Pollution Prevention and Control. Well, PR3 applies as well, from the use of the project's resources, such as water, materials, fuels and aggregate during construction, and also due to the generation of noise and air emissions, both construction and operation, and also from the potential for contaminated land to be present within the area of the site that was previously used for the rehabilitation and repair of vehicle engines. Now, looking ahead into operations, air emissions will also be generated through the future operation of a medical waste incinerator, and a variety of waste will be generated during construction and operation. And so, Alan, in relation to PR4, Health, Safety and Security, please tell us why PR4 also applies to this project.
PR4 is clearly applicable given the complex large-scale construction and associated hazards to the workforce and local community. Furthermore, the works are being undertaken in a seismic zone, so there needs to be consideration of mitigation around the structural components. Also, during operation, there will be a large-scale workforce, so occupational health and safety is a critical issue.
Thank you, Alan. And so moving on to PR5, land acquisition, restrictions on land use and involuntary resettlement. Well, PR5 applies as well to the project, because whilst the land was owned by the state, it was still being used for general access by local people from the nearby communities. And a review of Google Earth indicated that there were some pathways that were being used by local people. PR6, biodiversity conservation and sustainable management of living natural resources. Well, PR6 applies as well due to the requirement to clear land which was previously undeveloped and vegetation was present. Now PR7, Indigenous peoples, PR7 does not apply to the project because there are no people in the project area that meet the PR7 applicability criteria. PR8, cultural heritage. Well, PR8 applies. There will be significant excavations and earth movements, and these types of activities have the potential to damage physically any cultural artefacts that are buried below ground. So PR8 applies. Now PR10, information disclosure and stakeholder engagement, always applies. And for this project, a comprehensive public disclosure and consultation process was undertaken due to significant stakeholder interest in the project. And the key issues of local concern are, as you can imagine, local employment opportunities during the construction and operational phase of the project, as well as the future improved access to medical services once the new hospital was fully operational. So using this project as a case study, what we will do now is explore the application in detail of PR2, labour and working conditions, and PR4, health, safety and security. And so what we will do now is look at task 1, the review of existing information. And so during task 1, a variety of information was requested from the client. In relation to PR2, labour and working conditions, the information requested included details of the project's workforce, both now and in the future during the construction and operational phases of the project. One of the key challenges associated with this project was that there were multiple companies involved, and so the way in which the client was going to consistently manage the workforce, even though they belonged to different contractor companies, was a key issue of concern. So human resources policies and procedures of the clients were also requested, along with details about how those were going to be implemented across the entire chain of companies involved. A supply chain risk assessment is required under PR1 to check for, amongst others, the potential for labour violations to take place within the supply chain. And so the way in which the client had explored and assessed the potential for labour violations to take place within the supply chain was requested. In addition, an example worker contract was requested. Now, the PR2 guidance document contains a long list of items to check when you review an example worker contract to make sure that it contains all of the items necessary. A copy of the Worker Code of Conduct was requested because clearly having so many different companies involved in a large construction project introduces the risks of inappropriate behaviour by the workforce, as well as reflecting the potential for the workforce to adhere to different standards of behaviour as they come from different companies. And finally, details of the worker grievance mechanism and recent records covering the last 3 years was also requested. Alan, please tell us the items requested under PR4, health, safety and security.
Well, the risk assessment and register is always a good place to start. It really gives you an indication of the extent of understanding of the project, of the hazards associated with the development. As well as this, the natural hazard assessment is going to be important given the fact that the project is in an active seismic zone. Usually we would also look to review the construction occupational health and safety plan and procedures that support it for high-risk activities, such as confined spaces or working at height. The contractor management plan is also critical, given the complex construction, as would be the interface management plan to ensure that communication is assured. I would also look to review the emergency and response plan and the security management plan and any accompanying policies and procedures.
Thanks, Alan. So now let's move on to task 2, site visit and discussions. Now, the workforce for the construction phase are being provided with welfare facilities at the site and also at a separate facility a short distance from the main construction site, which is the canteen. These smaller facilities you can see on the screen are really there for the consumption of water, bottled water that is, and for them to take a rest break. But what they've turned into is essentially a mini cafeteria. Workers are preparing and consuming food, there's a microwave, there's a kettle looking quite close by to an electrical heater, and the cleanliness of the facilities is generally quite poor. But what this really indicates is that there is no culture of inspection by the client of these worker welfare facilities. There should be a regular inspection covering health, safety and environmental issues to ensure that all of the facilities provided are suitable and adequate. Tools should not be stored at these areas and overalls should be kept separate from them. And clearly the regular inspection is not something that's happening at the moment. Now, the activities undertaken during task 2 included the inspection of worker accommodation facilities, and you can see the building here on the left. On the top right is a photo of the dormitories, and you can see 4 beds to a room, which, considering the size of the room, is entirely adequate. However, the rooms themselves were filled partly with muddy boots and dirty overalls, and so again it reflects the fact that there is no separate storage area for these types of equipment. And the toilets were inspected and they were found to be clean. Now, during the site visit, it became clear that the accommodation facility was being refurbished, and one of the fire exits was observed to have been blocked by the storage of what appears to be construction materials. In fact, I think they're bags of plaster. Now, the client management system included a weekly HSE inspection of all areas of the worker accommodation, but that doesn't seem to be taking place. And in a way, this reflects the broader safety culture of the client. It also indicates that the construction materials have not been allocated a suitable storage area. Alan, please take us through some of the findings in relation to PR4, health, safety and security.
Thank you, Stuart. During the site visit, it was observed that excavations appeared unstable. There was a lack of shoring or benching to reduce the risk of excavation or trench collapse. Additionally, excavation is being undertaken during the winter, increasing the problems with stability. There is also no suitable edge protection, with plastic tape occasionally being used as a warning. And some of the excavations are very deep and filled with water and bentonite, with no means of escape. There was no rescue equipment available, such as a rescue buoy or line. Two means of access and escape is not always provided to excavations and trenches, as is required under good practice. Furthermore, where access is provided, it's of poor quality, using handmade ladders with no handrails. There are also loose stones and trip hazards. There's also evidence that workers have been climbing up and down the slope of the excavation, damaging the aggregate and exposing the waterproofing membrane. And some of the trenching to provide services to the site is being undertaken within the community on an active public highway. The picture in the bottom right-hand corner shows the extent of this trenching and the proximity to moving public vehicles. These sites are not fenced and the public can access the works. Furthermore, these trenches are also deep, without means of escape or shoring, and they also show evidence of collapse. Regarding working at height, at first the scaffolding appeared to be of good quality, but workers are not using it correctly. For example, if you look at the picture in the top right-hand corner, workers have made a dangerous scaffold bridge to link two separate scaffolds. Furthermore, scaffold tags or scaff tags are not being used. These are tags that allow workers to know if a scaffold is safe to use and when it was last inspected by a competent scaffolder. Without this, there is no evidence of erection or periodic inspection by competent persons. Also, some of the scaffolds are still under erection and do not have a means to prevent access of non-competent persons, such as removing the ladder or preventing access with signage and barriers. Also, during the visit, it was observed that workers were working at height without fall arrest harnesses. Additionally, works are being undertaken at height where the hazard could be reduced through the application of the hierarchy of hazard control. For example, inspection of coating works could be done using an aerial platform, such as a boom lift, cherry picker, basket crane, or scissor lift. Regarding construction site traffic management, construction site traffic management was a serious concern, given that the site is large and complex with multiple contractors and a lot of plant and deliveries. Key observations included that pedestrian routes and mobile plant are not segregated with barriers and signage. There is no defined traffic route for the construction site or one-way circulation. There is a large workforce and many contractors, each with their own material deliveries. These are not centrally managed, so deliveries are sporadic and unplanned, often leading to congestion of deliveries with trucks waiting outside the construction site on the public highway. During the site visit, a site exit was blocked and a vehicle was observed reversing into oncoming traffic without a signaller or traffic control, as you can see in the bottom left-hand picture. Plant does not always have beacons or audible reversing alarms. Additionally, large vehicle movements and complex maneuvers are not supervised by a signaller or banksman, and there is evidence of large plant tracking over high-pressure jet grouting lines without suitable protection measures to prevent damage. In relation to hot works, the project does not operate a permit-to-work system for high-risk activities, including hot works. Each subcontractor has their own workers, welding equipment, storage, and the performance is variable. The development includes bulk fuel storage, as well as storage and distribution of oxygen, an accelerant. Key findings during the site visit were that cylinder storage was poor. Cylinder cages were often unlocked and access is not controlled. Signage does not identify the contents of cylinders and the associated hazard. We also found that accelerant and fuel were being stored together, and in some cases, flash arrestor valves were missing, as you can see in the middle picture at the top. Welding works were also a concern. Poor PPE use and welding undertaken at height was noted without suitable risk controls or welding screens. Also, some portable generators, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, had an earth spike available, but it was not being used. This suggests that there is a need for training and better inspection. Also, grinding and cutting works were being undertaken without PPE or suitable spark protection measures. In relation to emergency preparedness and response, as we've mentioned already, it's a large, complicated project in an active earthquake zone. There is a large workforce with multiple contractors and simultaneous operations. The following observations were made. The emergency plan only considers fire. There is no formal fire safety studies or audit. It does not define responsibilities or include a clear process of escalation during an emergency. Furthermore, subcontractors are responsible for their own emergency resources. There is no centralized emergency response team and drills have not been undertaken. And there is also no register who is working on site at any one time. The local emergency services are under-resourced. They're unlikely to have sufficient capacity to respond to a large incident. And the design, construction method and emergency planning have not considered the potential risk and impact of earthquakes.
And so now let's move on to task 3, the analysis and reporting using the EBRD format. And so the purpose of task 3 is to take all of the information gathered during task 1, the review of existing information, and during task 2, the site visit and discussions, and identify what the key actions are that need to be included into the environmental and social action plan. And so the following gaps were identified that needed to be addressed through the ESAP. Number 1, complete a risk assessment of child and forced labour in the supply chain companies being used. This reflects the part of the world where labour violations within the construction sector are common, and also the fact that there are multiple different companies involved. Also, the client's human resources policies and procedures needed to be updated to prevent violence and bullying in the workplace, and the existing worker code of conduct needed to be updated. The client did not have a process to identify migrant workers who may be particularly vulnerable to exploitation, and there was also no process to inform workers of their rights under national legislation and also the applicable obligations under PR2. There was also a need to improve workforce accommodation and welfare facilities, which includes making those regular inspections that are already included in their management system. And finally, there was a need to implement a worker grievance mechanism to include the range of languages used amongst the workforce, measures to raise the awareness of the grievance itself, and to allow anonymous complaints to be raised. In addition, the grievance mechanism should require senior management to analyse grievances that are occurring to ensure that grievances of a similar nature are not reoccurring, and that the client is undertaking all of the necessary steps to improve the worker and labour performance of the project going forward. Alan, please take us through the gaps identified in relation to PR4, health, safety and security.
The following gaps were identified in relation to PR4. There needs to be a permit to work system for high-risk activities, including hot works, confined space entry, work at height. The risk of worker exposure to soil contamination must be assessed given the site's former industrial use and known presence of asbestos and oils. An earthworks procedure needs to be prepared and implemented that includes stability, shoring, access and inspection requirements for all excavations, including those on-site and those off-site. Works at height must be avoided where possible through applying the hierarchy of hazard control, using either better means of access or potentially on-the-ground prefabrication where possible. Only competent persons should inspect scaffolds and erect them. Scaffold tags must be used so that workers can understand what scaffolds are safe to use and which they should avoid. Gas cylinder storage, condition and use must be improved. They must be access controlled so that only competent persons can gain access to the equipment. The project must ensure hot works have suitable screens, fire prevention, and that suitable PPE is specified, supplied, and more importantly, used. Vehicle and pedestrian routes must be segregated with suitable barriers and signage, and one-way circulation must be used where possible. Workers and drivers will need training on these requirements. All deliveries need to be centrally scheduled as far as possible to avoid congestion and marshalling of trucks on public highways, which introduces hazards to the community. The emergency plan must be strengthened to cover all likely scenarios, including earthquakes. The plan must clearly define responsibilities between organisations and the process for escalation in the event of a major incident. The plan also needs to assess and control risks to local communities. Furthermore, the project needs to plan and conduct emergency drills covering possible scenarios. And finally, the project must centrally coordinate emergency response equipment and form a centralised emergency response team.
Thanks, Alan. And so as we close, let's have a final look at the application of the PRs to this specific case study. Now, whilst we've looked at in detail PR2 and PR4, clearly many of the other PRs also apply. And going forward, there's going to be a real need for the client to have an effective environmental and social monitoring system to gather information on air and noise and dust emissions, both during construction and during operations as well. And so this completes the training video for the healthcare sector. Please refer to the website for the guidance documents. Thank you.